The heat rolled off the desert like a living breath, turning the empty highway into a wavering ribbon of silver. For almost an hour, the man driving the sun-bleached sedan hadn't uttered a single word. His silence felt heavy, deliberate, the kind that grows teeth the longer it goes on. Then, as if the desert itself had coughed up a ghost, a lone figure appeared ahead on the shoulder. A young traveler, thumb raised, staring into the blazing Nevada sky. The driver hesitated only a second before easing the car over. Pebbles cracked beneath the tires, sharp and brittle, like something fragile snapping in protest. The hitchhiker hopped in with a grateful smile, too warm, too easy for a place as barren and unforgiving as this stretch of land. He introduced himself as Colton, settling his rucksack by his feet. But before he could say another word, a strange odor cut through the Arctic blast of the air conditioning. It was harsh chemical with a sickly sweetness lurking beneath it. Not rot exactly, not death in the usual way. Something cleaned, something scrubbed. Colton's eyes drifted toward the driver. The man looked to be in his 50s, but his face had that worn, fragile quality that made age impossible to guess. His skin was pale enough to almost match the dust outside, and sweat slicked his temples despite the freezing air. His hands were locked around the steering wheel, fingers white as bone. Then Colton noticed the thing behind them. A large cooler sat on the back seat, wrapped so completely in silver duct tape it looked mummified. Strip after strip overlapped in rushed, frantic layers, as though someone had tried desperately to keep whatever was inside from getting out, or from being seen. The driver finally hit the gas. The car shot forward, climbing over 80 in seconds, the landscape dragging past in long streaks of gold and shadow. Still, the man refused to look at his passenger. His eyes stayed fixed straight ahead except when they flicked upward to the rearview mirror. Not at the road behind them. At the cooler. A soft noise drifted from the back seat. Faint, wet, the kind of sound ice makes when shifting, or something else adjusting itself inside a cold, tight space. Colton's breath hitched. He told himself he imagined it, but then it happened again, just a little louder, a subtle slosh, like a sluggish heartbeat trapped in plastic. The hairs rose along his arms. He had hitchhiked across half the country in the past year. Truckers with loud radios, families with crumbs in the seats, a grieving daughter who cried the entire length of Colorado while he quietly passed her tissues. He'd learned how to read people, how fear settles in the shoulders, how anger sharpens the jaw, how danger makes itself known in the eyes before anywhere else. But this man didn't fit anything he had learned. And as the highway stretched on, endless and empty, Colton realized he hadn't climbed into a stranger's car. He had stepped into someone's unraveling. The unease crept in slowly at first, a subtle pressure, like the air tightening around Colton's chest, but soon it became impossible to ignore. Whatever lived inside the man driving this speeding sedan wasn't anger, and it wasn't simple fear. It was something far more dangerous, a kind of frantic, collapsing desperation that had hollowed him out from the inside, leaving nothing behind but a trembling edge of panic. The miles behind them disappeared in long gray streaks, the sun sliding lower across the sky as if trying to escape before night claimed the desert. Between the two men, silence gathered and thickened until it felt almost physical, like sitting inside a sealed box with no air left. Colton stared out the window. The land around them rippled out to the mountains in vast stretches of red and brown, a place that didn't just feel abandoned but exiled from life itself. He'd grown up on wide farmland in Iowa and thought he'd known what emptiness was. But this wasteland was different. This emptiness stared back. It wanted you quiet. It wanted you gone. Trying to steady himself, he mentioned his background, how he'd been on track for veterinary school before deciding to take a long trip across the country. His professors called it a break. His father called it quitting. Colton still wasn't sure which version of the truth fit. The driver made a faint sound, not a word, more like a grunt caught in his throat. When Colton asked where they were heading, the man finally responded with a single flat answer. Reno. Colton waited for elaboration. When none came, he asked what was waiting for them there. The driver's jaw tightened, tendons flexing beneath the stubble on his neck. For several seconds, he just bit down on whatever war raged inside him. Hospital, he said, nothing more. The word sat heavily between them as the car tore past 2 green mile markers. The road ahead stretched endlessly, a long silver scar across the desert's dead skin. No headlights behind them, no cars ahead, just heat, dust, and the drifting silhouette of vultures circling high above a patient, silent, ancient. The man's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror again, but this time he wasn't checking the cooler. He was scanning the road behind them, searching, hunting for something he clearly feared was coming. They said they'd be watching, he whispered. His voice sounded brittle, scraped dry. Said if I stopped, the deal was off. Colton's pulse thudded. Who said that? He asked. But the driver didn't respond. Instead, his foot pressed harder against the accelerator. The engine groaned in protest as the speedometer crept closer to triple digits. Wind roared against the frame like an animal trying to tear its way inside. Colton slowly reached for his phone, sliding it out of his pocket with his palm facing the driver, trying to make the motion look casual. He glanced at the screen. No bars. No text messages going out. Just the mocking spin of a bubble that never delivered. The driver noticed. Something in his expression changed. Something sank deeper. A new layer of dread folded itself into an already trembling stack of fears. And Colton suddenly understood. Whatever this man was running from, it wasn't just behind them. It was closing in. Nothing works out here, the man muttered almost to himself. Nothing ever does. Smell in the car had thickened, winding its way into the cold air like an unwelcome guest. Colton couldn't pretend it was his imagination anymore. It hit him with a strange familiarity, the sterile sting of preserving chemicals mixed with something softer, sweeter, wrong. It reminded him of the first-year anatomy lab, where specimens hovered on the line between preserved and perished. But this had a sweetness that didn't belong, a sweetness that warned of something on the cusp of turning, something that wanted to spoil. The cooler made another sound, a sharper slosh, louder than before, almost purposeful, as if the contents had shifted on their own. He knew it was just the movement of the car. He knew the physics. He'd studied this kind of thing. But logic did nothing to steady his gaze as it drifted again to the back seat, to the silver tape wound around and around, wrapped tightly enough to seem desperate, to the faintly stained white corners peeking from beneath the layers. Medical supplies. That's what the man had claimed. But medical supplies didn't need to be frozen solid. They didn't fill a car with the scent of something halfway between a butcher's back room and a lab fridge on its last day. They didn't slosh like thick liquid trapped inside a box. The driver's breathing shifted again, shorter, quicker, almost panting. His lips cracked as he swallowed, then spoke in a low, drifting murmur. like a man trapped inside a fever dream. Just gotta get there before it turns, before the ice goes. Has to stay fresh, has to stay cold. Colton's hand drifted to the door handle, instinct, not strategy. For a moment his heart lifted, thinking maybe he could slip out. But the lock held firm, child safety engaged, controlled from the driver's side. His pulse hammered beneath his skin, but he forced his voice to stay level, the same tone he used when calming terrified animals back at the clinic. A tone that said, "I'm steady," even when everything inside him screamed otherwise. "Pull over," he said quietly. "Just stop the car and let me out." "Can't," the driver's voice cracked. "No time, they're watching." "No one's watching," Colton insisted. "There's no one out here." The man let out a laugh. It wasn't amusement. It wasn't even human in the usual sense. It sounded loose, wet, like something breaking down inside him. "They're always watching," he whispered. "They told me. They know if I slow down, they know if I stop." A sudden buzz rattled the cup holder. Colton flinched so violently his knee hit the dashboard. The driver jerked the wheel. The sedan lurched across the center line, tires shrieking before he wrestled it back into place. He snatched the phone. The glow lit his face in a ghostly blue wash. Somehow, impossibly, he went even paler, his features sagging into a stunned, hollow slackness. A single message shone on the screen. "Almost there." For the first time since Colton had entered the car, the driver turned his head. Their eyes met. The man stared at him with something raw and broken, something that looked eerily like a confession waiting to be spoken. And Colton finally understood just how little time he had left. For the first time, really met them. No darting glances, no flickers of fear. A full, unbroken stare that pinned Colton in place. In that stare, he saw something shatteringly human and deeply wrong. A man cornered by choices no one should ever have to make. A man who had shaken hands with monsters, quietly, privately, and was only now realizing the price written in the fine print. Without warning, the driver reached under his seat. When his hand came back up, it held a small folding knife, not intimidating by design, but terrifying in its simplicity. The kind of tool a man kept for everyday chores, now twisted into something else entirely. The blade glinted as sunlight slid across it. "I need your help with this," the driver murmured. Colton felt every muscle in his body tense. He pressed himself back against the door hard enough that the metal frame dug into his shoulder blades. His pulse thrashed wildly, pounding like a fist inside his ribs. In an instant, he saw everything that trapped him: the locked doors, the suffocating emptiness outside, the sloshing cooler behind them, and now the knife lying inches away. He thought of Iowa, of his mother who still saved his childhood room, the way he left it, of his father who had stopped calling entirely, of a future he had been drifting toward without understanding if it was even his. The man swallowed hard, his voice trembled. "I can't do it by myself," he said. "Been driving 12 hours straight, can't feel my fingers anymore. And you said you were medical. You said you knew about." His throat closed around the word he couldn't bring himself to say. Colton didn't need to hear it. The pieces, the cooler, the tape, the chemical smell, the frantic rush toward Reno, all slid into place with grim, unavoidable logic. His stomach turned cold. "Who's?" he whispered. The driver's breath hitched. Then he broke. One sharp tearing sob burst out of him, raw, violent, unstoppable. "My boy." The car didn't stop, but it slowed. just enough that the roar of the engine softened, just enough that the moment held a terrible kind of stillness. The knife, now forgotten, slid onto the dashboard and stayed there, harmless in the shadow of something far heavier. Colton finally heard the man speak. His name was Grady Felon, age 52, a pipe fitter from Sacramento. He recited those details like he was listing another man's life, someone he used to know, someone who had existed before the desert, before the cooler, before whatever he had agreed to. Then came June. His wife, gone 3 winters ago. Breast cancer found too late, treatment that came too little, a loss that hollowed him out in ways no one could measure. He talked about her freckles, the ones she hated and he adored, her laugh, her apple pie that won ribbons at the county fair, the way she smelled like flour and warm sugar when she hugged him after work. And then his voice wavered, cracked, and finally broke into a thin tremble. She died in a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and plastic, he murmured. Alone except for me and the boys. Colton listened, really listened, as the truth unfolded like a wound being opened. And the cooler behind them grew impossibly heavier. She died in a hospital bed that hummed with machines, the kind of room that always smells faintly of plastic and endings. Grady held one of her hands, their son held the other. Everett, just 19, too young to lose the center of his world. He didn't cry while she slipped away. Not then. Not until later, when the weight of it finally broke him open in the parking garage. Grady had found him there, hunched in the driver's seat, sobbing into his palms. And he'd climbed into the back seat and wrapped his arms around his boy the same way he had when nightmares were simple things that vanished with a hug. But some nightmares grow up, some never leave. 6 months after the funeral, Everett's heart began to fail, dilated cardiomyopathy. Grady spoke the words like they were glass, careful, slow, terrified they might cut him. The doctors had tried to explain it. Diagrams, medical jargon, a heart that was stretching beyond what it was meant to hold, a pump losing its rhythm one beat at a time. They put Everett on the transplant list, and then they told Grady to wait. 6 months of watching the boy fade. 6 months of hearing monitors chart the slow betrayal inside his chest. 6 months of being told others were ahead of him, people whose bodies were failing faster, as if dying were some kind of race where being closest to the finish line made you the winner. And when hope thinned to a thread, the shadows found him. That's how Grady tried to tell it. The underground market found him, like he hadn't typed desperate messages at 2 in the morning, searching for anything that might save his son. Like he hadn't called numbers whispered in online forums or answered texts from people who didn't use names. But Colton heard the truth under all of it. A father clawing at darkness, because it was the only place left to search. A contact in Sacramento, another in Las Vegas, a man who promised what hospitals couldn't, a heart. $200,000. Every cent Grady Felon had. He sold the house where his wife took her last breath, sold the truck he'd driven half his life, drained the retirement he once imagined would carry him gently into old age, spent the insurance money that June told him with her last strength was meant for Everett's future. He took every piece of their life, every sacrifice, every memory, every hopeful dollar, and handed it over in an Oakland parking garage to a man whose face he could barely recall, though only 3 days had passed. A man who shook his hand with practiced confidence and said everything would be fine. Yesterday they called him, gave him an address, told him when to show up, told him what would be waiting in the cooler, told him what would happen if he stopped. The message had been simple: a rundown motel on the edge of Tanapa, room key hidden in a cracked envelope under a false name. Inside that room, a cooler would be waiting. No questions, no delays. Drive straight north and don't let anyone slow him down. That was the command. If he followed the instructions perfectly, a private surgeon in Sacramento, already paid in full, would be standing by in a clandestine operating room far from the rules and oversight of any hospital. They promised that Everett would be transferred there quietly, tucked into a bed beneath dim surgical lights, ready for the new heart his father was racing across the desert to deliver. 24 hours, that was the limit, with extra ice maybe 30. Grady was already 22 hours in. The scent rising from the back seat had grown thicker, like something pushing its way out of a locked room. It stung the back of Colton's throat, that syrupy hint of something turning bad beneath a layer of chemicals that failed to hide the truth. He knew about organ transport, the fragile window of survival, the temperature thresholds, the protocols handled with a precision bordering on reverence. Nothing about that smell belonged in a successful transplant run. Something had gone wrong, maybe early, maybe long before Grady ever touched the cooler. "Let me look at it," Colton said quietly. The words made Grady's foot soften on the gas. The needle dipped. The engine's roar eased into a strained hum. The car drifted toward the shoulder until gravel spat beneath the tires. "I need to see the ice," Colton added. "I need to know if it's still usable. I'm trained." Not entirely a lie. 2 years of veterinary school before life split beneath him like thin ice. The fiancée who walked out. The apartment that echoed too loudly after she was gone. The sudden urge to escape the gravity of everything familiar. He traveled west with more regret than luggage, but he still remembered the feel of a heart in his hands. The chambers, the valves, the warm anatomy that didn't belong in a cooler stuffed into the back of a stranger's car. Grady stopped the car, turned off the engine. Silence swallowed them. Even the desert seemed to hold still, the air vibrating with heat. The only sounds were the soft metallic ticks of a cooling engine, and far above, a hawk circling on thermals. And from the back seat, that wet sound again. Faint, wrong, a slow, rhythmic shift as if something settled itself each time the world exhaled. Colton stepped out. The heat felt like stepping into an open furnace, a dry, relentless punch that squeezed the air from his lungs. Inside the car, the cold air had been artificial, a borrowed chill delaying entropy, a thin veneer hiding what the desert knew well. Everything living bends toward decay. He opened the back door. The smell surged out and wrapped around him. Thick, heavy, inescapable, not the crisp sterility of well-preserved tissue. This was old, fermented, a note of sweetness adulterated by something deeper, a warning carried on the air like a whispered truth. Whatever lay inside that cooler was no longer what it was meant to be. The heat settling thickly on the back of Colton's neck as he held the ruined organ in his hands. The world felt too bright for what he was seeing, too ordinary for the horror of a father's last hope rotting in the open air. Grady took a few slow steps forward. What do you think?" His voice trembled like each word might shatter in his throat. Is it good enough?" Colton didn't answer. Not at first, he couldn't. The heart sagged between his fingers, the muscle collapsing in on itself in a way no healthy tissue ever should. A living heart holds tension, a kind of memory of beating. This one had none. It was collapsing, folding, sinking like something long dead. Grady's shadow fell across him. "Tell me it can work," he whispered. Just tell me it can work and I'll take it right now. I'll drive it straight to the hospital. They don't have to know where it came from. They just need something. Anything. Colton forced himself to look up. Grady's eyes were wild with hope, the kind of hope that only grows when a man has nothing left to lose, the kind of hope that borders on madness. Grady, Colton started, but the name caught in his throat. He looked back down at the heart, if it could still be called that, limp, deteriorating, a grotesque imitation of the miracle Grady had paid everything for. There was no universe where this could save Everett. There was barely a universe where this could be considered human. Finally, he found his voice. "This is no good," he said softly. "It's been dead too long. It wasn't stored right. It's breaking down." Grady's face crumpled, not in anger, that would have been easier. It was something far worse. A father realizing the last door had closed, the last bridge had burned, the last thread had snapped. "They told me," Grady whispered, staring at the cooler as if it had betrayed him. "They swore it was fresh. They said they had a donor. They said my boy still had a chance." Colton swallowed hard. He wanted to offer something, a lie, a comfort, a miracle, but the truth was a shadow pressing down on them both. "Grady," he said gently, "this isn't a transplant. This is evidence of a crime." The older man's breath hitched. "But I paid them everything I had. His voice broke. He covered his face, shoulders trembling, the sun beating down as if it meant to burn them all clean. Colton looked at the ruined organ, still slick in his gloves, still leaking its cloudy preservation fluid onto the pavement. And as the summer heat wrapped around him like a suffocating blanket, he understood something he wished he hadn't. Whoever had taken Grady's money hadn't just sold him a dead heart. They had never intended to save Everett at all. They had only intended to take. Who loved him more fiercely than he'd ever been able to say out loud. What it would mean for Everett's last hours to be spent watching the doorway, believing help was coming, believing his father was on his way, the way children believe in storms breaking and morning arriving simply because their parents told them it would. Colton felt the heat press against his back, felt the heart grow slicker in his hands as the melting solution dripped between his fingers. A gust of dry wind carried the scent upward, the smell of rot mixing with dust and sun-baked earth. It was a smell no hope could survive. He closed his eyes. He had lied before, hundreds of small lies, maybe thousands. Lies to get by, lies to escape, lies to protect himself from truths he didn't have the strength to face. But this lie, this one would hollow out something inside him that would never grow back. This one would carve a mark he'd carry for the rest of his wandering life. He opened his eyes and saw Grady still watching him, eyes pleading in that quiet, broken way of men who have lost too much and are terrified to lose the little they have left. Grady's hands twisted together, knuckles pale, shoulders trembling under the weight of hope he barely dared to hold. Colton swallowed. He realized, with a clarity that landed like a stone in his chest, that Grady had not brought him here to evaluate the heart. He had brought him here to confirm a faith he'd already sold his life to. Grady needed someone to say yes, someone to bless his sacrifice, someone to tell him he had not been a fool, that he had not traded everything, his house, his security, his future, for a phantom. But Colton also saw something else. If he lied, Everett would die. Not months from now, not weeks, hours, and Grady would carry that guilt like a wound that would never close. Colton lifted the heart again, felt its impossible weight one more time and set it gently back into the cloudy, spoiled solution. The water sloshed, a dull, sick sound. He wiped his hands on his jeans. They came away streaked with something dark. He looked at Grady. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind tugged at their clothes. A vulture drifted lower, waiting. Colton's voice, when it finally came, was quiet. "It's not human, Grady." The words hit the air like a blow. Grady blinked as if struck. His lips parted. A tremor traveled through him, starting at his shoulders and moving down his arms until his hands dropped uselessly to his sides. Colton stepped closer, his voice steady, even as something inside him twisted. "This heart, it wouldn't save him, not for a minute. Whoever sold this to you," he swallowed. "They robbed you." Grady exhaled, a sound that wasn't quite a cry and wasn't quite a breath. His knees bent, not collapsing, but as if the ground had shifted beneath him and he needed a moment to find his balance again. "For 6 months, Grady whispered, staring at nothing. 6 months I prayed, I thought I finally found something real." Colton felt that old instinct rise, the one that told him to turn away, to walk off into the desert, to let the world take care of itself. But he stayed. "You did everything a father could do," he said quietly. "Everything." Grady lifted his head. His eyes were red, raw, stripped of everything but truth. "What do I do now?" The wind carried the question away, as if the desert itself wanted to spare him from hearing the echo. Colton looked at the cooler, at the taped seams, at the sun overhead sliding toward afternoon. "You go back to him," Colton said. "You sit with him, you hold his hand, you stay. That's what he needs now." For a long moment, Grady didn't move. Then slowly, like a man who had to relearn the meaning of motion, he nodded. He walked to the cooler, stared down at it, then closed the lid with a tenderness that made Colton's throat tight. He didn't take it with him. He simply turned, walked to the car, and rested his hands on the roof, as if steadying himself against a world too heavy to stand upright in. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Thank you." Colton watched him get in the driver's seat, watched the car sit motionless for a full minute. Then, with a soft groan of tired machinery, it turned around and headed back toward Sacramento, toward the boy who was waiting for a miracle that would now never come, but would at least not be replaced with a crueler lie. And when the dust settled, Colton stood alone in the desert beside a cooler that smelled like death, with only the wind and the circling birds to bear witness to the truth he had chosen. And for the first time in years, he did not run. It clung to his skin, to the lines of his palms, to the creases of his fingers. He wiped them on his jeans, but the smell stayed, stubborn and sour, like guilt itself had seeped into his pores. Grady didn't move, didn't breathe, it seemed. He just stared at the closed container, at the duct tape curled on the ground, at the lie he had bought with every last piece of his life. There was something ancient in the stillness of him, something that ached with the dignity of fathers who had tried and failed since the beginning of time. "Grady," Colton said quietly. It felt wrong to speak in the desert's heavy silence, wrong to disturb a man's grief before he even understood how deep it ran. But Grady didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the cooler, but he wasn't seeing it. He was someplace far away, a hospital room in Sacramento, maybe. A 19-year-old boy on a hospital bed, waiting for a door to open. Colton took a step toward him. "We can still go back," he said, though he knew how empty the words were. "You can be with him, you can." Grady turned his head slowly, like it weighed more than bone and muscle, like memory itself was dragging it down. His eyes were dry, too dry. A man who had run out of tears long ago. "He trusted me," Grady whispered. Each word was a tremor. "He trusted me to save him." Colton felt the truth of it like a blade in his own chest. He wanted to say something, anything that might soften the blow, but nothing felt honest. Nothing felt right. And lies had already done enough damage. A sudden gust of desert wind lifted dust into the air, sand whispering across their boots. A vulture dipped lower, its shadow sliding over them like a passing judgment. Grady's shoulders sagged, not in anger, not even in despair, just surrender. The quiet collapse of a man who had held himself together through sheer force of will and finally reached the moment where even that wasn't enough. "What do I tell him?" Grady asked. His voice was small, the voice of a man asking the world for mercy and already knowing he wouldn't receive any. "That you love him," Colton said gently. "That you're there, that you didn't leave." Grady closed his eyes, and for a long moment neither of them moved. The desert waited with them, patient, ancient, indifferent. When he finally opened his eyes again, something was gone. Not hope, that had died the moment Colton spoke the truth. Something deeper, something that wouldn't return. "Help me put it back in the car," Grady said. His voice was steady now, hollow but steady. Colton nodded. There was nothing else to do. Together in silence, they lifted the cooler, heavy with melted ice, with rot, with the weight of a father's last hope, and placed it in the trunk. Grady closed it gently, as if it were something fragile, something sacred. Then he walked to the driver's door, opened it, and slid inside. He looked at Colton through the open window. His expression wasn't anger, wasn't gratitude. It was something in between. A recognition, maybe. A silent understanding that two men had shared a moment neither would ever fully escape. "I have to get back to him," Grady said. "Just that, nothing more." Colton stepped back. "Go." The engine turned over. The car rolled forward. And as Grady drove toward the horizon, toward the sun who waited for a miracle that would not come, the vultures lifted into the sky again, spiraling up on a column of hot desert air. Waiting. Always waiting. Failure hung between them like a shadow with no shape, no words to fill it. They pressed westward through the desert toward Sacramento, toward a hospital room where Everett Felon, just 19, waited for his father. But the mission had shifted. No surgeons would be waiting. No hidden operating room. No miracle transplant. Only a father returning, clutching the last shreds of hope in his hands as time slipped through their fingers. Grady drove deliberately, each turn measured, each mile slow. The cooler remained in the back seat, untouched, a silent sentinel to the collapse of everything that had been promised. It was a third presence in the car, as heavy as the weight of failure itself. Outside, the desert melted under the sinking sun, changing from ochre to gold to bleeding red, a land that seemed to mirror the raw wound of their lives. Colton watched the horizon and imagined the men who had orchestrated this scam. Somewhere out there, they slept in comfort, counting cash stolen from desperation, planning their next cruel venture, indifferent to the fathers and mothers who would give everything to save their children. Grady's phone vibrated once, harsh and sudden, but he ignored it. The pale glow briefly lit the interior before fading, the message unread, the sender irrelevant. Another mark, another family, another fortune purchased with hope. As dusk gave way to night, Grady's voice finally broke the silence. He spoke of June, the girl who had caught his heart at 17, at a county fair between the cornfields and dusty roads of their youth. He told of the ring toss, the lemonade he bought to soothe his bruised pride, the purple stuffed bear she chose that would remain on their bed for 3 decades. He remembered the apartment above the hardware store where they had lived early in their marriage, a space so small that touching both walls at once was possible. He recounted the endless work, pipe fitting, construction, warehouse nights, 3 jobs at once, anything to keep their dreams alive while she finished her own ambitions. Through the window, the desert whispered around them, vultures gliding silently in the twilight. Inside, the car carried the remnants of broken promises and crushed hope, 2 men bound by loss, a boy waiting, and a cooler that bore the bitter evidence of how far desperation could drive a parent. The journey continued, slow, deliberate, the landscape reflecting the quiet devastation that stretched behind and ahead, an unforgiving witness to every choice, every lie, every price paid for love. Her nursing degree, the tears she had shed at her first paycheck, not for the money itself, but because it meant survival, because it meant they had clawed their way through the worst of it, the years that felt endless and cruel, and somehow they had made it. They were still here. They were going to be okay. He spoke of Everett's birth, 18 hours of labor and not a single complaint from June, never a request beyond ice chips in Grady's hand. The boy had arrived screaming, furious at being ripped from the only world he had ever known. Yet the instant Grady held him, the cries stopped. His eyes, wide and impossibly knowing, seemed to see everything, understand everything, forgive everything before he had even learned the language of the world. He remembered little league games, science fairs, and the dangerous go-kart Everett built at 12, a rickety creation that should have killed him, but somehow didn't. He spoke of college applications, scholarships, and a future so brilliant it had seemed infinite, limitless in a way Grady had never imagined could run out. Then came the diagnosis, cancer, delivered like a casual forecast, an unavoidable inevitability. June squeezed his hand, whispered, "We'll get through this." She had been wrong, but never once stopped believing she was right. Even at the end, when morphine blurred reality and she called for a mother long gone, she clung to hope. The funeral had lasted all day, rain pouring as though the sky itself mourned. Everett, dwarfed by a suit bought for his graduation, stood beside the grave, shoulders narrow, frame hollowed by grief. 6 months later, Grady found him collapsed in the kitchen, gray-faced, lips pale, heart failing like an engine running dry. The stars multiplied above them as they drove, the highway stretching endlessly. Miles passed in silence, broken only by the voice of a father saying goodbye in the only way he knew, through story, through memory, through the life he had loved and lost. Colton listened. That was all anyone could do. Some griefs are too vast for comfort, too heavy for words. They can only be witnessed, honored by presence, by refusing to look away. When they reached Sacramento, the hour was long past midnight. The hospital loomed before them, lights spilling through the darkness like a fortress against the night. Grady eased into the parking garage, killing the engine, hands gripping the wheel, unable to move. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on a man frozen between past and present, between hope and despair, between what was and what could never be again. Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a sickly glow that made every shadow stretch deeper, every silence heavier. Somewhere beyond the walls, a boy clung to life. A boy who had gripped his mother's hand as she faded, now waiting for his father to return, waiting for something that would never arrive, waiting with the quiet surrender of someone already learning to let go. Colton looked at the man beside him, Grady. Exhausted face, hollow eyes, hands that no longer shook because there was nothing left to tremble for. He thought of all the words he could offer, empty phrases, shallow comforts, lies dressed as hope. They meant nothing, but people still said them, filling unbearable silences with noise. Colton said none of that. Instead, he whispered, "You go up there. You sit with him. You hold his hand." Grady closed his eyes, a single tear tracing the line of his stubbled jaw. "I promised him. I promised I'd save him," he murmured. "You did everything you could. It wasn't enough." The words hung between them, unvarnished truth, harsh and unhelpful. Colton had not planned to speak it aloud, but the silence demanded it. Grady opened his eyes and met Colton's gaze. In that look passed something heavier than words, an understanding of the world not as they wished it, but as it truly was. Some things could not be mended, could not be saved, could only be endured. Grady stepped out into the harsh light of the garage, a man at the edge of everything he had loved. Colton followed, grabbing his rucksack, walking around the car to stand beside a man he would never see again. Words were useless here, so he reached out his hand and Grady took it. For a moment they simply stood together, two men bound by grief and exhaustion, in the quiet aftermath of everything. Above, the hospital hummed with its endless rhythm, the business of life and death continuing regardless of readiness. Below, the city slept, unaware of the lives unfolding within its streets. Then Grady released his hand and turned toward the elevator. Colton watched him go, watched the doors close, counted the numbers rising floor by floor toward whatever awaited above. He lingered a moment longer, then slung his rucksack over his shoulder and stepped into the night. At 7:43, the boy's small body gave in to the inevitability of the world. The first light of morning crept through the blinds, pale and sharp, cutting across the quiet chaos of the hospital room. Grady had been there all night, hand in hand with his son, a silent anchor in the tide of machines keeping time for a body that could no longer move on its own. Hours had passed, the hum of monitors a relentless reminder that life had already begun slipping away. Everett never stirred. His eyes remained closed, his lips still, his tiny chest barely rising beneath the hospital sheets. The staff moved in and out like shadows, nurses adjusting IVs, doctors scribbling notes, but Grady barely noticed them. His world had shrunk to that pale hospital bed, to the faint warmth of the hand he held, to the unbearable weight of knowing. He had watched the truth settle in slowly, like sand through fingers. His son was gone. Perhaps he had been gone the moment the heart started failing, the moment the universe had made a cruel decision that no amount of money, no act of desperation could overturn. When the machines finally fell silent, their alarms replaced by nothing but emptiness, Grady did not flinch. He did not beg. He did not cry. He only watched as the nurses and doctors went through the motions, disconnecting cords, pulling the sterile sheet over a body that once contained a beating heart, that once held a boy full of life and wonder. Grady moved closer, his fingers brushing the soft fabric that now separated him from his son. He traced the shape of the hand he had held at birth, the hand that had gripped his own during June's final moments, the hand he had clasped in the desert under the scorching sun, carrying hope that had been nothing but a lie. Everett had thanked him once before the impossible journey began. "Thank you for trying," the boy had whispered, half faded, already drifting toward something else. Grady remembered every step he had taken since that day, the parking garage in Oakland, the exchange of everything he owned for a promise he had wanted to believe. The desert, the long drive across night and sand, the cooler in the backseat holding a heart that was never his son. Every mile had been a chase after a phantom, a pursuit of hope that had dissolved before his eyes. And now, all that remained was reality, stark and unyielding. He lingered there, standing in the growing sunlight, the hospital alive around him with the endless rhythm of life and death. The living moved among the dying, unaware of the grief concentrated in one man's silent gaze. Grady's world had contracted to a single point: the absence of his son, the echo of promises he could not keep, the unbearable weight of loss that no money, no desert crossing, no desperate hope could ever undo. He stayed like that, hand hovering, heart breaking in slow, unmeasurable beats, until the world outside continued on, oblivious, unstoppable, and cruelly indifferent. The first light of day filtered through the blinds, soft and unforgiving, illuminating Grady's rigid form in the hospital room. He had been sitting there for hours, holding his son's hand, a tether to a life that was already gone. The machines had been counting down like a cruel metronome, every beep a reminder that time had run out. Everett hadn't stirred, hadn't spoken, hadn't opened his eyes. He had simply slipped away, leaving behind the hollow echo of a life that was no longer there. Grady stayed still, watching, feeling the emptiness settle into his chest. There would be forms, questions, next of kin, signatures, but not yet. For now it was just him, the boy he had carried in his arms, the boy who had trusted him to make the impossible happen. The quiet between heartbeats was deafening, heavier than any words, more certain than any promise. Far away in a small motel room bathed in neon shadows, another man counted money with meticulous precision. Stacks of crisp bills pressed together, hundreds bound by rubber bands, the weight of $200,000 pressing into his palms. He counted once, twice, a third time, not because he doubted, but because he savored the touch, the tangible proof of power, of influence, of a system perfected over years. Names were irrelevant. Only money mattered. Only the transaction mattered. Only the desperation of parents could feed his operation. And he knew exactly how to harvest it. He thought about Grady, the father, the pipe fitter, the man with a dead wife and a dying son, weeping with gratitude as if giving him everything could summon miracles. The truth was simpler, crueler. The heart in the cooler had cost under $150. A butcher's pig heart, a medical cooler, some labels and chemicals, and suddenly a fortune was extracted from a grieving man who had believed in hope rather than reality. The return on investment was spectacular. Human suffering converted into crisp bills, neatly stacked and zipped into a duffel bag. The phone on the nightstand buzzed. 3 more conversations, 3 more desperate families caught in the same trap, each unaware that the system would strip them bare. One was still debating a price. One was liquidating every asset they owned. One would be on a highway tonight, cooler in hand, chasing the impossible again. Back in Sacramento, Grady remained seated, fingers entwined with nothingness, watching the monitors fall silent, knowing the truth that had been apparent in the desert all along. Some miracles never come, no matter how fast you drive, how much you pay, or how far you chase them. The world continued indifferent. Life and death carried on around him. But for Grady, the world had stopped. For a few hours, he simply held what had once been his son, alone with grief, alone with the unbearable weight of loss. And somewhere in that neon-lit motel, the man smiled, ready for the next call, ready to turn desperation into currency again. The dance repeated itself endlessly, a cycle of hope, lies, and human vulnerability that no amount of money could ever truly fix. Flagstaff. He tossed the phone onto the nightstand, already thinking about swapping it for a fresh burner tomorrow. This one was starting to fail him, spots of dead reception that almost ruined a deal in Tucson last week. He couldn't afford another slip. He switched off the lamp and sank into the bed. eyes tracing the ceiling as the neon pulse of the Las Vegas Strip spilled through the curtains in jagged, restless patterns. Hunger gnawed at him. He hadn't eaten since breakfast. Below, a steakhouse promised thick, sizzling fillets, pink at the center, butter melting into the meat. He imagined the taste, the texture, and idly wondered if the beef came from the same supplier he used for the hearts. No, different cuts, different markets, different realities. Soon he would drive to Phoenix, meet a contact about new medical-grade packaging, cleaner, sharper, more convincing. But first, the car needed an oil change. He couldn't risk a breakdown with the Flagstaff job looming. He exhaled, let his eyes drift shut, and slipped into the kind of deep, untroubled sleep reserved for people unburdened by guilt, conscience, or reflection. A sleep where the world owed him nothing, and suffering had no meaning. Outside, the Las Vegas sun climbed, relentless and blinding, striking a city built on one certainty. There would always be another mark, another desperate soul willing to trade everything for a fleeting chance at hope. Somewhere out there, hearts would be broken, money exchanged, and illusions sold. Meanwhile, in Sacramento, a deserted parking garage beneath a hospital held a silent testament to that exchange. A sedan sat exactly where it had been abandoned hours earlier, keys still in the ignition, doors unlocked. In the back seat, the cooler waited, bathed in a shaft of light slicing through concrete pillars, dust motes dancing like spirits desperate to escape. The ice had long since surrendered to heat. The preservation solution inside had warmed, then stifled further, the precise science of organ transport surrendering to the raw chemistry of decay. Within the sterile white container, its biohazard symbol gleaming like a mockery of authority, the pig's heart was rotting. By midday, it would sag gray and soft, tissue unraveling, cells bursting, the intricate architecture that once propelled blood through life collapsing into a shapeless, foul mess. By nightfall, it would be unrecognizable, mere meat, discarded and useless. A $43 illusion returned to dust, and the world above oblivious. He had warned him, gently, painfully, that the path he was chasing led nowhere. But now, none of that mattered. 3 days passed before anyone even noticed the abandoned sedan. It started with a smell, a thick, sour odor that drifted through the lower levels of the parking garage. A security guard followed it, step by hesitant step, until he found the car sitting exactly where it had been left, silent as a tomb. He called the police. The police called Hazmat. Hazmat opened the cooler, braced for something horrific, and found nothing but a decomposing lump of flesh floating in darkened liquid, a heart reduced to sludge, a mystery with no answers, no suspects, and no story anyone could piece together. The car was towed, impounded, and weeks later, sold at auction. Its new owner would drive it for years, never knowing what had once rested in the back seat, never imagining the desperation that had stained that upholstery long before they touched the wheel. The cooler didn't get such a second life. It was burned with the rest of the medical waste, reduced to ash that drifted into the morning sky, carried off by winds that paid no mind to the grief tied to it. 12 floors above the garage, a father sat at a table surrounded by paperwork that had no mercy to offer. He initialed boxes, signed lines, confirmed details, released the body, returned the belongings, decline or accept donation, finalize funeral arrangements. Each signature chipped away at him. Each form felt like another shovel of dirt thrown onto a coffin. He never mentioned the desert, never mentioned the cooler, never mentioned the men who had taken every dollar he had left. Why would he? Who would believe it? And what good would it do? Nothing on earth could bring his boy back. Nothing could rewind the decisions that had led him here, the lies he believed, the risks he took, the hope that devoured everything. When the final form slid across the desk, he signed it with a hand that barely felt like his own. Then he stood, nodded numbly at the administrator, and stepped outside. The morning was painfully bright. Birds chattered in the trees. Cars rolled past. People hurried along the sidewalk, carrying coffees, checking watches, living lives untouched by the earthquake that had shattered his. He had no home left, no savings, no plan. He had gambled everything for a miracle that never existed. Now his son was gone. His wife was gone. His world was gone. He was simply a man standing alone on a sidewalk in California, breathing in a day that had no space for his grief. And as he stood there, lost in a world that moved on without him, he thought about Colton, the stranger who had been honest when no one else dared, who had stayed beside him through the longest night of his life, who had held his hand when there was nothing left to hold on to. He stood at the edge of the parking structure, staring into the dim stretch where Colton had vanished moments earlier. The night had swallowed the man whole, the same way it swallowed memories you wished would stay. Grady wondered if Colton had found another ride, or if he had simply walked back toward the trouble he'd been escaping. And then his thoughts drifted, painfully, tenderly, to June. Her freckles, her laugh that used to fill their tiny kitchen. The way she looked at him on their wedding day, eyes shining like he was her entire world, as if marrying him had been a blessing she still couldn't believe she'd earned. Then came the memory that cut the deepest, Everett. He could still feel the weight of his son as a newborn pressed against his chest, still hear that bright, bubbly laugh Everett had as a child, still remember the desperate promise he'd made the boy, "I'll fix this. I'll save you. I won't let anything happen," a promise he never had the power to keep. The hospital doors slid open behind him, and Grady Fallon walked out into the morning light, only to collapse under the truth he could no longer outrun. His son was gone. This time the grief didn't come quietly. It tore through him. Great shuddering sobs racked his body, the kind of raw human pain that makes strangers avert their eyes. People passing by gave him space, the way folks always do when faced with someone else's tragedy. No hand on his shoulder. No, "Are you okay?" Just hurried footsteps, each person lost in their own burdens, their own fears, their own small worlds. The sun climbed higher, the warmth grew heavier, and when the tears finally ran dry, Grady wiped his face with shaking hands. There was nothing left for him here, nothing left anywhere, really. But a man can't stay standing in one place forever. So he began to walk. He didn't know where his feet were taking him. He didn't know what waited at the end of the road. He didn't know how he would survive the long, empty stretch of days ahead. Days without purpose, without family, without the people who once tethered him to the world. But still he moved forward. Because sometimes forward is the only direction a broken man has left. Back in the parking structure, in the forgotten backseat of a sun-baked sedan, the pig's heart lay where it had been abandoned. Heat gnawed at it. Time pulled it apart. There was no witness, no mourning, just the slow return to nothingness. Life went on. People passed by. The world kept turning, as it always does, whether anyone is ready or not. Story 2, The Appalachian Princess. The night Caleb Farrow first laid eyes on Serafina Bridger, the sky over Dunning Hollow bled in bruised purples and grays. a sickly canvas that mirrored the ache in his chest. Something inside him cracked that evening, a fracture that would never fully heal. He was 23, that autumn of 1847, when news whispered down from the ridges. Judge Bridger's daughter had fallen gravely ill, confined to her bed by a wasting sickness that left the whole valley murmuring in concern. Caleb had seen her only twice before. Once at the harvest festival, where she drifted through the crowd and addressed the color of morning glories, her presence ethereal, almost untouchable, leaving a trail of stolen breaths in her wake. The second sighting was through the window of her father's carriage, her pale face framed by the glass, her dark eyes catching his for a heartbeat that stretched impossibly long. A smile, faint and fleeting, brushed her lips, and Caleb carried that fragile curve with him for months, turning it over in his mind like a river stone smoothed by obsession. The locals whispered of her as the Appalachian princess, though never loudly near her father. Judge Orrin Bridger ruled the county court with an iron resolve. Mercy was alien to him. 3 men had swung from the gallows that year alone, each execution watched from his office window, coffee in hand, the trapdoors falling with mechanical precision. Yet even his power could not bring Serafina back from illness, could not bend life to his will. Caleb told himself it was none of his concern. The Bridgers lived in a world far removed from his own, and yet, night after night, his boots carried him past their wrought iron gates, following the long gravel drive on his way home, an unconscious pilgrimage. He once glimpsed Dr. Hadley leaving the house, his face pale and lined, shoulders heavy with defeat, and Caleb's chest ached in empathy he could not name. On the 7th night, the impossible happened. The gate swung open, yawning wider than he had ever seen. His heart thundered as if it had anticipated this moment. The gravel drive stretched before him, curling toward the mansion like a serpent poised to strike, or perhaps to embrace. Every rational thought screamed for retreat, for the safety of his family's modest farmhouse, for the life he was meant to lead. But weeks of watching, of longing, of obsession had rooted a force within him that was beyond reason. It was not love, not in the gentle sense. This was hunger possession, an urgency he could neither explain nor resist. His hand closed on the cold iron, and his feet carried him forward, up the winding drive. The mansion loomed like a silent sentinel, 3 stories of brick weathered by wind and time. A single candle flickered in a second-floor window, casting shadows that moved with the slow, spectral grace of someone too frail for their own body. Instinct guided him to the trellis, and without hesitation his hands found holds, his legs remembered the strength of younger years. The night air was crisp, scented with pine and damp earth, and as he climbed, Caleb felt the weight of inevitability pressing upon him. Every heartbeat, every rustle of leaves below, was a drum summoning him closer to Serafina, closer to the mystery that had ensnared him long before he understood its depth. Tonight he would cross the threshold that reason forbade. Tonight, the Appalachian princess would no longer be a shadow glimpsed from afar, but a presence he could not escape. And Caleb knew, as the night held its breath around him, that nothing would ever be the same again. Caleb's hands ached as he scaled the trellis, the dark night wrapping around him like a velvet shroud. A hidden thorn tore into his palm, searing pain that somehow felt earned, a toll for crossing into a realm that was not meant for him. He didn't falter. The window above was ajar, spilling the heavy scent of illness and decay into the cool night air. His stomach churned, but beneath that acrid tang, there was another odor, strange, unplaceable, like meat left too long under the sun, and it pulled him forward with a fascination he didn't understand. He pushed the window wide and slipped inside. The room was stifling, heated by a fire that crackled stubbornly despite the mild autumn evening. Every surface was crowded with candles, dozens of them, flickering and trembling as though their fragile light could keep the darkness at bay. And there she lay, Seraphina Bridger, not the vision of morning glory beauty Caleb had glimpsed at the festival, but a shadow of herself, hollowed and fragile. Her dark hair spilled across the pillow like ink in water, her face drawn sharp and pale as parchment, cheekbones jutting like silent accusations. When her eyes opened, they were wells of black, bottomless and impossible to read. He did not recoil. He knelt, took her hand, and felt the icy shock bite through his fingers, a chill that no fire could chase away. The smell here was stronger, clinging to the air and to her, a terrible sweetness that his mind wanted to name but his heart refused to acknowledge. "You're the boy who watches the house," she whispered, voice dry and brittle like fallen leaves. Her frail fingers tightened on his hand with a grip that defied the emptiness of her form. "What do you want, farm boy?" "I want you to live," he breathed, words trembling in the heavy air. A dry, rattling laugh escaped her, dissolving into a coughing fit that left dark flecks on the pristine linen. Caleb's stomach turned as he realized it wasn't blood, but something darker, earthier, like soil clinging to the living. "The doctors have tried everything," she rasped. "Leeches, mercury, prayers." Her throat rippled just beneath the surface, a movement like snakes beneath thin skin. Then it was gone. "I'm rotting from the inside out," she admitted, voice fragile yet edged with fear. "There's a woman in the hollers people say she can cure anything. The witch." Fear flared in her eyes for the first time, stark and unguarded. "My father, he had her run out of town. Cursed me, cursed his line, said blood and silence would follow if he knew I spoke of her." Caleb squeezed her hand, his jaw set. "Then he won't find out." In that dim candlelight, with shadows trembling across the walls, he understood. Nothing in the world mattered but her survival. And for the first time, he knew he would cross any boundary, brave any danger to keep her alive. "I can take you to her tonight," Caleb said, his voice low but steady. Her eyes widened. "Why? Why risk everything for someone you barely know?" "Because I love you," he wanted to confess, because from the first moment he saw her, he felt a fracture in his soul that only she could fill. Instead, he said, "Because no one else will." Her fear remained, but now it was joined by a spark, wild, raw, like a predator sizing up prey. Later, Caleb would remember that look and understand the promise it carried. In that moment, all he saw was a girl teetering on the edge, a life hanging in the balance. "Then we better hurry," he said, gripping her hand and wincing at the sting of his wounded palm. The journey into the hollers stretched for 3 grueling days. Caleb had taken a horse from his father's barn, old Mulak, a gray draft past his prime, but steady enough to carry them across jagged mountain trails. They rode under the cover of night, shadows their only companions, avoiding the patrols and dogs that Judge Bridger had surely sent in pursuit. By the second night, distant baying echoed through the valleys below. But Caleb knew these mountains like the lines on his hands. He guided Seraphina along hidden passes, trails that existed only in whispers of the forest and memory of the land itself. Crossing a creek, the dog's scent was lost, leaving them unseen, untracked. Each mile took a toll on Seraphina. Her body radiated cold that seeped into Caleb's bones as they pressed close for warmth at night, a creeping poison he could not shake. She sometimes murmured in her sleep, words from a tongue he did not recognize, clawing at the air with ghostly hands. Once, he awoke to find her standing at the edge of their camp, staring into the black forest as though listening to voices only she could hear. "Bad dream," she whispered when he called her name, her eyes catching the moonlight in an unsettling, animal-like glint. He led her back gently, like guiding a fragile bird to its nest. By the third morning, the forest changed. Trees leaned close together, their branches knitting a ceiling that swallowed the sky. The undergrowth thinned into lifeless earth, rust-colored and cracked. No birds sang, no insects hummed. Even the wind dared not move. Then they saw it, the witch's cabin, crouched in a hollow between two ridges, a squat hovel of rough-hewn logs with a sod roof, surrounded by an eerie, silent clearing. Wooden frames hung with bones and feathers, circles of stone containing cold ashes, and a faceless scarecrow draped in a tattered dress. Not a single blade of grass dared grow within 10 feet of the cabin's walls, as if the earth itself feared the place. On the porch, an old woman sat shelling beans. She lifted her gaze as they stepped into view. One eye gleamed blue, the other milky with age and mystery, and for a heartbeat, the forest itself seemed to hold its breath. The witch's gaze was unflinching, her mismatched eyes fixed on them with a quiet inevitability. "Been expecting you," she said, voice like dry leaves skittering across stone. "The farm boy and the princess. Bring her inside." Inside, the cabin was thick with the scent of herbs, earth, and something faintly like a graveyard after rain. Bundles of dried plants dangled from the low ceiling. Shelves groaned under jars filled with unidentifiable contents, some dark and viscous, other shapes that hinted at organs long preserved. In one corner, a spinning wheel stood frozen, its spindle wound with threads so black they seemed to swallow the light. The witch bent over Serafina with the precision of a practiced healer, fingers probing, testing, knowing. She made a soft, throaty sound, then turned her gaze to Caleb. Something unreadable flickering in her eyes, pity, warning, or perhaps both. "You know what she is, boy," Caleb whispered. "She's the woman I love." The witch chuckled, the sound brittle and rustling like dry leaves. "Love is a blindfold, boy. It hides what's plain before your eyes." "Can you save her?" Caleb asked, voice tight. "I can," she replied. "I can make her stronger, brighter than she has ever been. But everything has a price." "Name it," he said without hesitation. Her smile was old, carrying centuries of sorrow and knowledge. "Beauty is a mask for the starving. Remember, boy, once the bell tolls, you cannot unring it." She extended a hand, withered and warm, paper dry as old parchment. "The cost will be what I say when I say it. Do we have a bargain?" Caleb clasped her hand. The touch sparked something ancient, a current that passed between them like a promise written in a language older than words. For 3 hours, the ritual unfolded. Caleb was sent to the porch, surrounded by bone chimes and faceless scarecrows, the witch's chant spilling into the night in the same language Serafina had murmured in dreams. The air thickened with the acrid scent of burning herbs and hair. Once, a scream pierced the darkness, high, thin, inhuman, cutting off so abruptly it left Caleb's ears ringing. He rose instinctively, but something invisible held him in place, a certainty that stepping forward would reveal a horror he could not endure. When the door finally opened, the witch emerged, her frame diminished, as if the ritual had leached from her what could never return. Her eyes found Caleb's, exhaustion and triumph interlaced with a profound sorrow that made him catch his breath. "It's done," she said. "Go see what you've brought back." Inside the room, Serafina sat upright. Her skin had shed its pallid, parchment-like hue, now flushed with warmth and life. Something in her eyes flickered, a spark that had been missing, a glimmer of the vitality that had once made her seem untouchable, otherworldly. Caleb stepped closer, heart pounding, aware that whatever had been paid in shadows and whispers had changed everything. Luminous in the soft candlelight, her form no longer haunted by the sharp angles of sickness. Her hair fell like a dark river over shoulders softened by health, and her eyes, those fathomless black eyes, locked on him, and Caleb felt his chest tighten. "You saved me," she whispered, voice trembling yet steady. He stepped forward, taking her hands into his, warm, alive, strong. For the first time, her touch carried weight and life. She smiled, and it was a sunrise spilling over mountains, brilliant, inevitable, and breathtaking. Caleb understood in that instant that he would face anything, bear anything to keep that light on her face. The cut on his palm throbbed where their skin met, a sharp reminder of the cost, yet it felt right, almost sacred. A small toll for the miracle before him. Behind them, the witch's voice floated like a shadow. "Don't thank me yet, boy." But Caleb didn't hear. His focus was entirely on Seraphina, the warmth of her hands, the impossible proof that she had returned to him. If he noticed the witch's mismatched gaze following every flicker of movement, measuring and weighing, he chose to ignore it, dismissing it as nothing. Outside, the wind stirred the bone chimes in eerie music, a sound that hadn't been there before. From the holler came a howl, not a wolf or dog, but something older, deeper, an echo of a world older than their own, a sound that carried both menace and mirth. They remained in the hollow for 2 weeks. Time folded into itself. Each morning revealed Seraphina anew, her beauty no longer just restored but magnified, radiant in a way that made Caleb's heart ache with awe. The sickness had been a chrysalis. She had emerged a creature luminous, unstoppable. Her laughter rang through the mountains, bright as church bells, and every brush of her fingers against his skin left him trembling, as though fire ran beneath his veins. The witch watched silently, providing meals of wild rabbit, squirrel, and vegetables from her garden, where colors defied the natural world. At first, Seraphina devoured her food with a hunger that made Caleb shiver, as if reclaiming years of deprivation in every bite. But gradually, her appetite shifted. Plates went untouched. Her gaze drifted beyond the cabin into the shadowed trees. At times, Caleb would find her at the edge of the clearing, still as stone, head cocked unnaturally, listening to a language the forest alone understood. And Caleb, watching her, knew that whatever had been returned to her, whatever light now filled her, carried a secret weight, one that neither he nor the witch could fully name, but that hummed through the hollow like the low pulse of some ancient, restless thing. She didn't answer when he asked what she was doing, only gave that same quiet, distant smile, one that never touched her eyes. On the 5th night, Caleb awoke to find her side of the bed empty, cold as winter stone. He stumbled outside and found her in the moonlight, kneeling beside a rabbit. The animal's body was unnaturally still, untouched by claw or teeth, yet raw, its fur brittle and gray, its eyes sunken deep, flesh tightened against bone, as if some unseen hunger had drawn out every drop of life. Seraphina's head lifted, shadowed by the silver glow of the moon. A dark stain lingered at the corner of her mouth. "It was already dead when I found it," she murmured. Caleb wanted to believe her. He didn't. But he chose silence, folding the image into the collection of truths he refused to see. "Come back to bed," he said, and she obeyed, leaving the rabbit behind unspoken. The night before they left the hollow, Caleb's rest was stolen again. Her side of the bed was empty, and the full moon cast long, pale fingers across the forest floor. There she stood at the edge of the woods, her nightgown luminous against the dark, head tipped back as though inhaling shadows. When she lifted her hand to her lips, a cold knot tightened in his stomach. Her face, caught in the moonlight, warped for a heartbeat, angles too sharp, eyes catching light like a predator, mouth stretched in an almost inhuman curve. Then she blinked, and it was Serafina once more. Behind her, something lay collapsed, twisted in the brown leaves. A deer, perhaps, though it bore no steam in the cool air, no sign of blood, only a hollowed, unnatural stillness. Caleb looked away, unwilling to name what he had seen. When they returned to Dunning Hollow, the morning fog clung to the hills like a ghost. Wanted posters were plastered across the county, rewards, threats, warnings. But Serafina walked into her father's house with a fire in her step, and a radiance that made the fog lift from every soul in the room. Within hours, the notices came down, and Caleb found himself being measured for a suit for an engagement he hadn't dared dream of. He glimpsed the judge's face as Serafina entered the parlor, an expression not of relief, not of joy, but of recognition, as though a nightmare long buried had returned. Then she was in her father's arms, the man weeping, and Caleb told himself he must have imagined the fleeting terror. It began quietly. A chicken coop on the edge of town, dead birds found one morning, emptied of blood, feathers scattered like ash, and the darkness that had followed them from the holler was only beginning to stretch its long fingers across the quiet Appalachian hills. The townsfolk whispered in hushed tones, their voices trembling with the sort of fear that creeps into bones. Livestock found lifeless and hollowed, dogs and goats reduced to brittle frames of fur and bone, vanished only to reappear in grotesque states. One by one, the animals were discovered in impossible places, behind the church, in pastures where sunlight couldn't reach, and no predator's tracks were ever found. Fear swelled, unchecked, until it settled in the valleys like a creeping fog. Then Ezekiel Garrett vanished. 15 years old, a boy accustomed to the creek and the quiet of his traps. When he didn't return, the hills awoke with the sound of men calling his name, search parties fanning out along the winding streams. On the third day, they found him, or what was left of him. The men could barely speak, their voices caught in throats choked with dread. The body was hollowed, empty, a grotesque vessel left where life had once been. The whispers began immediately. Some claimed they saw eyes, wide and staring even in death, as if the boy had glimpsed something beyond understanding before he was taken. The judge spoke from the courthouse steps, declaring a bear attack, but no one believed him. Caleb stood at the fringe of the crowd, the memory of Serafina seared into his mind. The way she had once looked at the world, assessing, probing, as if every person she touched could give up some secret essence without a word. The brush of her hand against a cheek, the subtle grip of her fingers along an arm, ordinary touches that left ordinary people pale, drained, trembling. That night he found her in the garden, bathed in silver moonlight, eyes fixed on the sky. "Where were you the night the Garrett boy disappeared?" he asked, tension stiffening his voice. Her smile was patient, unnerving in its calm. "In my bed, darling, where else?" And somehow he felt exhaustion seep into him, questions dissolving like mist at sunrise. He followed her silently to his chambers, his thoughts retreating into shadows, even if the boy's hollowed eyes haunted the edges of his mind. Then came the scream. It ripped through the house like a cleaver through flesh, shattering the quiet of the night. Caleb bolted down the corridor, instinct screaming until he reached the kitchen. Bonnie Dwyer, the cook, stood frozen at the doorway, hands clamped over her mouth, eyes wide as lanterns. On the stone floor, sprawled unnaturally, lay Hosea, the family's manservant, a man of decades, loyal and steadfast. Caleb fell to his knees beside the body, stomach knotting with horror. Hosea's eyes stared at him, glassy and unblinking, locked in an eternal gaze of terror. His throat hadn't been cut, it had been torn, ripped by force impossible for human hands to wield. Every fiber of Caleb's being screamed at him to flee, yet he remained, caught in the impossible weight of what had been done. Outside, the wind seemed to hold its breath, and the mountains themselves waited, silent witnesses to the darkness that had come alive in their midst. Hosea's body lay like a grotesque sculpture, chest hollowed out as if some unseen hand had scooped everything inside and left nothing but darkness. His ribs fanned outward, exposing a void that made the stomach twist, a black emptiness deeper than any anatomy should permit. Caleb's breath hitched, every instinct screaming that this was impossible. A sharp voice cut through the horror, Judge Bridger, storming into the kitchen like a gale in winter. Night robe flapping, hair wild, he stepped past the chaos, and behind him, Seraphina appeared, draped in silk, her dark hair tumbling over her shoulders, eyes wide in an expression of pure, rehearsed innocence. "Father, what's happened to Hosea?" she asked, voice soft as a whisper. But Caleb's gaze had fixed elsewhere, not on the body, not on the ruin of flesh, but on the judge himself. Just for a fraction of a second, Bridger's eyes flicked, not to the carnage, but to Seraphina's lips. A glimpse gone almost as soon as it appeared, but in it was something terrifying, raw, abject panic. The look of a man who has spent a lifetime containing a darkness he always feared would rise, now staring it fully in the face. Then it vanished. Orders were shouted, chaos erupted, and Seraphina pressed against Caleb, trembling as though she too were shocked. Later, after the body had been removed and the house had settled into an uneasy silence, Caleb studied her hands. Small, delicate, clasped neatly at her waist, yet beneath the fingernails a shadow of something dark lingered. When her eyes caught his, she smiled, a private, knowing smile. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted a finger to her lips. "It's the witch," Caleb whispered before he could stop himself. The words hung in the air, and instantly Caleb knew. They were not the truth, not even a guess, merely a feeble attempt to look anywhere but the truth staring back at him. Judge Bridger seized upon the notion like a man drowning, desperate for a scapegoat. The witch had cursed the family. People were dying. Within the hour, a search party rode hard toward the hollers, the wind biting at their faces. By midday, they reached the cabin. The old woman emerged onto the porch, smaller, grayer, as though the weeks had drained her vitality. The bone chimes hung silent, and the faceless scarecrow had collapsed, its dress pooling in the dust like shed skin. "You came sooner than I expected," she murmured, her mismatched eyes locking on Caleb. But there was that same quiet hunger in her gaze, something endless, something waiting. Stronger than anyone imagined. As the men dragged her forward, her gaze found Caleb's, steady and unreadable. No blame, no fury, only a profound exhaustion that seemed to carry centuries of sorrow. "You want the truth, boy," she murmured. "Come see me before the trial." 2 days later, the courthouse swelled with townspeople, faces taut with fear, curiosity, and the hunger for justice, or at least the illusion of it. Evidence against her was thin yet compelling, the pattern of deaths, the whispered curse, the unexplained vanishings. Seraphina sat in the front row, her posture regal, her expression a mask of quiet rage. Caleb beside her felt the cold that radiated from her like ice creeping through his veins, not as frigid as during her illness, yet colder than the warmth she'd shown after the cure, a fire burning too fiercely and consuming too quickly. When asked for her final words, the witch lifted her head, hair limp around bruised cheekbones, marks of the men who had dragged her here. But her voice cut clear through the tension, reaching every ear in the courtroom. The guilty are not always the ones in chains. Beauty is a mask for the starving. She met Caleb's eyes with a smirk through broken teeth. "Ask your future son-in-law what that means, Judge." The room erupted. Caleb's gaze flicked to Serafina. For a heartbeat, something unnatural twisted her features, bones shifting beneath skin, jaw moving in impossible ways. Then she returned to human perfection, radiant and flawless, leaving Caleb questioning his own senses. That night after the sentence was handed down, Caleb crept to the jail. The witch waited, her mismatched eyes glinting in the lantern light. The cell was damp, narrow, yet she sat in the corner like a predator lying in a shadowed web. "Tell me what she is," Caleb demanded. "You know what a sign-eater is," she whispered. "Not the stories told to children, the real ones. In these mountains, some families carry the gift. They don't eat bread to remove sins. They consume body and soul alike." Caleb's stomach twisted. "Serafina, she's Judge Bridger's daughter." The witch nodded slowly. "And the last of her line for a reason. Her mother died in childbirth, or so the story goes. Truth is, Orrin Bridger smothered her when he realized what she was, what she had become. He came to me afterward, begged me to suppress her hunger, told me of what would happen if I failed, the bloodlines erased, villages emptied, legends born to keep children in their beds. That wasting sickness, not sickness, starvation, and I had been feeding. For 17 years, the witch had kept Serafina's true hunger at bay, locking it behind layers of ancient spells. But the walls of that cage were cracking. The girl was stirring. The witch leaned close to the iron bars, her eyes dark pools of warning. "What you thought was decay," she said, her voice sharp and low, "was her nature clawing its way to the surface. When you struck your bargain, I honored it. I let her become what she was always meant to be." Caleb's stomach churned. "Why?" he asked, though he feared the answer. "Because you demanded it," the witch whispered, her voice breaking with the weight of truth. "Because the price I named was my own life, and because part of me wanted to see if love could bend the impossible." She paused, letting the horror sink in. "The sin eaters are older than these mountains, predators without equal. They feast on guilt, on sins. The deeper the transgression, the sweeter the flesh. Judge Bridger fed her for years, fattening his prey in the courtroom while magic kept her blind to what she truly was. Garrett, Hosea, they were dark ones, the kind that call to the hungry at night." Her bitter smile cut Caleb to the bone. "Do you know why she hasn't touched you yet? Because your soul is too clean, too pure, no guilt worth devouring. Yet every day you turn away, every secret you keep, every death you ignore, you season yourself, boy. You prepare for the feast." Caleb stumbled backward, shaking. There must be a way to stop her. The witch shook her head slowly. "No, she is what she is. The best hope is suppression, a cage for the beast, and I alone know how to forge it." "And when sunrise comes," Caleb's voice trembled. "They'll hang me," she said flatly, "then finish her. Iron through the heart, the only way." "I love her," he whispered. The witch's laugh shattered the room, dry, jagged, hopeless. "Then you're already dead, boy. You just don't know it yet." That night, Caleb did not sleep. He watched the candle gutter down to its stub, staring at the shadows that twisted along his walls, trying to piece together what the witch had revealed. The girl he had seen at the harvest festival, the delicate, morning glory-eyed Serafina, was the same as the one he had held in the candle-lit bedroom, hollowed and ravenous. The puzzle fit too perfectly, the horror too precise. The cold that emanated from her, the way she devoured meals only to abandon them, the hollowed animals left in her wake, the way even a touch could drain life from those around her, and Judge Bridger's eyes, recognizing something no father should ever know. And through it all, her gaze had been on him from the beginning. Not love, Caleb realized with a sickening clarity, but calculation, evaluation, measurement, the predator sizing up its next meal. When Caleb replayed the night in his mind, every detail sharpened into something far more sinister. The unlocked gate, the open window, the trellis placed just so beneath her room. None of it had been chance, none of it fate. It was a snare built for one person, and he had walked straight into it, blinded by the hope of saving a dying girl. Morning crept in pale and bitter, and the thud of hammering echoed from the courthouse square where workers prepared the gallows. Caleb found Serafina waiting in the foyer, draped in deep crimson like a queen dressed for coronation. Her dark hair lifted to bare the elegant line of her neck, but her eyes were black mirrors with something ancient drifting behind them. "You visited her," she said softly. Not a question, a certainty. Her gaze pinned him. "She told you what I am." Caleb swallowed hard. "A sin-eater," he whispered. "A monster." Serafina tilted her head, almost pitying him. "Such cruel names. Or perhaps you've simply lied to yourself long enough to believe them. You sensed it from the first night you climbed through my window. The cold, the scent, the way I stared at people." She leaned close enough that her breath brushed his cheek. "You saw the wolf and pretended it was a lamb." "The witch can bind it again," he said. "She knows how." Serafina's smile curled like a blade. "The witch will be dead within the hour, and once she's gone, there will be no one left who understands how to keep me chained." She turned, her dress whispering across the floor. "I've been preparing for this since I learned what my father did to my mother. The witch thought she was saving me. My father thought he could harness me. And you," she laughed, a sound that used to ring like silver but now cracked like something breaking. "You believed you were my hero." Her fingers traced the edge of the window as she stared out at the rising gallows. "You are all just pieces on the board, and I have been moving you exactly where I needed you." "I'll stop you," Caleb said, though his voice barely held. "Who will believe you?" she murmured. "A man who dragged the judge's daughter to a witch in the woods." She turned to face him again. "No, you won't say a word, because even now, even with the truth staring you in the face, you still want me." He opened his mouth to deny it, but nothing came out, because some awful, fractured part of him did still want her. Even knowing what she was. Even knowing she had steered him toward murder. Even knowing he was nothing but a tool. And that unbearable, shameful truth hollowed him out. "Go," she whispered. "Watch the witch die, and then come back to me." The town flooded the square for the execution. Caleb lingered at the far edge as the witch was led out in chains. She walked with the solemn dignity of someone who had already accepted her fate. Her eyes searched the crowd until they found him. A small, gentle smile touched her lips. No anger, no accusation, only sorrow. They guided her up the wooden steps, placed her over the trapdoor, and tightened the rope around her neck. "Any last words?" the sheriff asked. Her voice, steady and chilling, rolled across the silent crowd. "Your princess will feed tonight, and every night that follows." Then her gaze locked onto Caleb, fierce and unflinching. "And you will be the first course or the last. The choice has always been yours." Dawn crept over Dunning Hollow like a dying ember, and all night Caleb's mind replayed every impossible detail. The open gate, the unlatched window, the trellis placed just so beneath her sill. None of it had been chance, none of it fate. It had all been bait laid out for him, and he had walked straight into the snare with his heart wide open. When morning finally broke, he heard the pounding of hammers in the courthouse square, a gallows being readied. He found Serafina waiting for him in the foyer, wrapped in a gown the color of fresh blood. Her hair was swept high, exposing the pale curve of her throat. She looked like a queen preparing for coronation. not a woman standing in the shadow of an execution. You visited her, she murmured. Not a question, a certainty. Her eyes, black and bottomless, held a flicker of something older than language. She told you the story, didn't she? She told me what you are, he managed. She tilted her head, amused. A sin-eater, a beast. People use such ugly terms when they're frightened. Her steps were soft as she approached him. You knew long before the witch spoke. You knew the moment you climbed through my window, the cold, the way everyone shrank from me, the hunger in my eyes. She leaned close enough for him to feel her breath. You saw the wolf and pretended it was a lamb. The witch can bind it again, Caleb said. She can stop this. Seraphina's smile curved cruelly. She won't live to try, and when she's gone, no one else will understand the cage she built for me. Her voice dropped, honeyed with triumph. I've waited 17 years for this. Since the day I learned what my father did to my mother, the witch thought she was saving me. My father thought he could direct me like a hunting dog. And you, she laughed softly, a sound like breaking glass. You thought you were my hero. Caleb bristled. I'll stop you. Who will believe you? She asked, sweeping to the window to watch the workers finish the gallows. A boy who stole a dying girl into the night. You look mad already. She didn't turn as she added, and you won't say a word, because even now you love me. He opened his mouth to deny it, but nothing came out, because the truth, aching and poisonous, lived inside him. He did love her. Loved her even knowing what she was. Loved her even as she peeled back her mask to reveal the monster underneath. Go, she whispered. Watch her hang, then come back to me. The entire town gathered for the execution. Caleb stood behind the crowd as they led the witch forward in chains. Her spine was straight, her chin raised. When her mismatched eyes found him, she gave a small, heartbreaking smile, the kind of smile that forgives. They placed her on the trapdoor. The rope settled around her throat. Any last words? Someone shouted. Her voice carried across the square like a final spell. The princess will feast tonight and every night that follows. And you, she said, her gaze locking onto Caleb, will be the first course or the last. The choice has always been yours. The trapdoor snapped open. She fell. And just like that, the only person who understood how to stop Seraphina dangled lifeless in the cool morning air. Behind him, laughter rippled through the crowd, bright, delighted, and utterly wrong. Seraphina. She stood there in her crimson gown, eyes glowing with joy. People shifted away from her without knowing why, as animals instinctively clear a path for something predatory. It's done, she whispered. Finally done. Caleb felt something inside him fracture. I'm going to stop you. Are you? She asked softly, brushing her fingers along his cheek. You don't know how, and even if you did, you wouldn't walk away. Her touch was ice. So I'll give you a choice because I do care for you. Stay with me, be the prince beside my throne. Help me choose who deserves to be hunted. Do that and I'll never harm you. You'll grow old beside me. Our children will be beautiful. Her voice dipped, low and sharp. And they'll never know what their mother is. And if I refuse? Her smile curled like a knife. Her face shifted, angles sharpening, shadows tightening over her bones, hints of teeth that didn't belong inside a human mouth. Then you'll be the first course, she whispered, and your family will follow. Caleb held her gaze. And he chose. 3 months passed. Outwardly, nothing in Dunning Hollow seemed amiss. Judge Bridger's daughter had married a local farm boy in a celebration the whole county envied. Visitors traveled from cities just to see the radiant, enchanting bride. She and Caleb moved into the Bridger mansion, where her beauty became legend. The disappearances never stopped, they simply became tidier. A wanderer here, a wicked man there. Criminals, drifters, sinners chosen with surgical precision. Judge Bridger continued his ruthless rulings, and those sentenced rarely lasted long enough to meet their punishment. Caleb witnessed all of it with hollow, haunted eyes. He tried at first desperately to fight her. He searched for medals, rituals, prayers. He tried to warn neighbors, tried to tell them what lived behind Seraphina's perfect smile. But she had been right from the start. No one believed him. The love-struck farm boy claiming his bride was a monster. Madness, they said. Guilt, perhaps, or grief, nothing more. And worst of all, in the darkest hours before dawn, he was forced to face a truth more terrible than all the rest. He still loved her. Even now, after the deaths, after the lies, after the monstrous things he'd seen, part of him still shivered when she entered a room, still felt his breath catch when she smiled, still ached for her cold touch as she curled against him at night, her beauty pressed to his warmth. That was the horror he could never escape. Not the deaths, not the disappearances, not even the monster beside him. The real terror lived in his own heart, and it was hers completely. He had never believed in fate, but standing in that empty hall, staring into the fire, he finally understood how long he'd been walking toward this moment. He thought back to that night, the gate left wide open, the window lifted just enough, the trellis angled as if placed by an invisible hand. None of it had been chance, none of it kindness. It had all been arranged piece by piece to draw him in. A dying girl in need of saving, and a fool willing to leap into the dark for her. And now dawn was breaking. The entire town gathered outside, their breath fogging in the cold, waiting for justice to be carried out. But before Caleb could join them, she appeared. Seraphina was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, draped in a red gown that glowed like fresh blood against the pale morning. Her hair was pinned high, exposing the curve of her throat, the same throat he had once kissed without understanding what lived beneath the skin. "You went to her last night," she said softly. Not a question, a verdict. His stomach twisted. "She told me the truth." A faint smile touched her lips, but her eyes, bottomless, ancient, hungry, never blinked. "And what truth was that? That I'm some fable whispered by frightened men? A sin eater?" She stepped forward, tilting her head. "Why cling to such ugly little names?" "You knew," Caleb whispered. "You knew from the moment I climbed into your room. You let me believe you were helpless." Her voice brushed against him like cold fingertips. "I didn't let you believe anything. You chose the story that made you feel noble." He swallowed. "The witch can bind your hunger again." "No," she said. "She dies today, and with her will die the only cage ever strong enough to hold me." Her expression shifted, not angry, not afraid, triumphant. "I've been preparing for this since I was old enough to understand what my father did to my mother. The witch tried to save me. My father tried to bury the truth. You tried to rescue me." She laughed, a sound with no warmth left in it. "You are all pieces on my board." "I'll stop you," Caleb said, though the words tasted like ashes. "Who would believe you?" she asked gently. "The boy who ran off with the judge's daughter, the boy who hid me away in a witch's cabin." Her smile deepened. "And you won't warn anyone, Caleb, because you still love me." His heart clenched because it was true, because even knowing everything, some broken part of him still ached for her. "That," she whispered, "is your curse." She leaned in, her breath cold as winter. "When the witch dies, come back to me." The execution square hummed with the feverish breath of a crowd hungry for spectacle. Caleb stood at the fringe, unable to move, unable to breathe as the witch was dragged forward in chains. She found him instantly. No accusation in her eyes, only sorrow. As the rope was fitted around her neck, she lifted her chin and spoke to the town, but her last words were for him. "The princess feeds tonight," she said, "and you, boy, you choose whether you're the first dish or the last." The trapdoor slammed open. Her body dropped, and behind him, a laugh rippled through the crowd, soft, delighted, chilling. Serafina stood watching, her crimson gown blazing like firelight dancing on blood. The townspeople stepped aside instinctively, their instincts whispering what their minds refused to see. "It's done," she breathed. "It's finally done." Caleb turned to her, and something inside him snapped. "I'll stop you," he said. She touched his cheek with a lover's tenderness. "And I'll give you a choice, Caleb. Stay beside me. Help me hunt the wicked. Help me shape the world. Stay, and I'll never harm you. You'll grow old with me." Her eyes darkened. "Refuse, and you'll be the first one I take. Your family the second." He stared at her, at the monster, wearing the face he'd fallen in love with, and made his choice. 3 months bled by. The town saw nothing but a fairy tale. The judge's daughter marrying the grieving farm boy, moving into the Bridger mansion like royalty. Outsiders whispered about her beauty. Locals whispered about the bodies, the drifters, the criminals, the men who vanished from their cells before execution. No one whispered about Caleb. He tried everything: silver, iron, old stories, warnings. But he was dismissed as a jealous husband with a fevered imagination. And still some part of him loved her. Loved her enough that the shame crawled under his skin like rock. The witch had been right. Love was the blindfold he tied himself. Winter came heavy. On the 3rd night of a blizzard, Caleb sat by the fire, trying not to hear the muffled shrieks that drifted up from the basement, trying not to imagine what she was doing down there. Then she drifted into the room, pale, barefoot, wearing a white gown that floated behind her like a spirit's veil. She sank onto his lap, tracing his throat with her cold mouth. "I'm starving," she whispered. "There's food in the kitchen," he said weakly. She chuckled. "You know that's not what I crave." She kissed his pulse, and he felt the sharpness of her teeth. "I can't reach sinners tonight," she murmured. "They're hiding from the storm, but you." Her fingers slid into his hair, pulling his head back. "You've been sinning, haven't you?" "I haven't done anything." "You planned to betray me," she said. "I tasted it on you." He froze. Serafina sighed almost lovingly. "I've been patient, so patient, but even patience has an end." "Wait, please," Caleb gasped. "If you kill me, you lose everything, your partner, your prince. You'll be alone again." "I've always been alone," she whispered, "even in your arms." She stepped back, studying him with a strange tenderness. "I'll give you one mercy before you die," she said. "A truth." Caleb's heart hammered. "What truth?" Her expression softened in a way that hurt more than any cruelty. "The witch didn't just die," she said. "She offered herself to me, willingly." Caleb shook his head, unable to breathe. "No." With her last breath. "She did what she could to help you," Serafina went on. "She gave me control, choice." She touched his chest. "And every night, I chose to let you live." He stared at her, stunned. "Why?" he whispered. Her smile was almost gentle. "Because your guilt fed me. Every sleepless night, every moment you couldn't look at yourself. Your sorrow kept me strong." He felt tears gather, hot and useless. Then why tell me now? Because guilt only feeds me when it festers in the dark, she said. Now that you know the truth, it will fade. You'll tell yourself stories to survive, and once the guilt is gone. Her face shifted subtly at first, then horrifyingly. I have no reason left to spare you. Serafina. I did love you, she whispered. In my own way. Remember that when everything ends. Then she changed. Not transformed. Unfolded. Her beauty peeled away like skin splitting at the seams, revealing something that had never been human. A maw opening far too wide, ringed with spiraling teeth, eyes birthing more eyes, a darkness inside her that swallowed the firelight. Every nightmare he'd ever feared suddenly had a face, hers. And all of it was focused on him. Wanting him. Hunting him. As she came forward, the thought hit him like a hammer. The unlocked gate. The open window. The trellis placed just right beneath her room. None of it had been luck. None of it had been fate. He hadn't rescued her. He'd walked straight into a snare built just for him. Morning crept over the town like a dying breath, pale and cold, and the distant rhythm of hammers echoed from the courthouse square. When Caleb stepped into the foyer, she was already waiting for him. Serafina stood framed in the doorway, wrapped in a gown the color of fresh blood, her dark hair pinned high to reveal the porcelain grace of her neck. Her eyes, bottomless and black, locked onto his. You visited her, she said, not a guess, a certainty. You know. Caleb swallowed hard. She told me what you are. Serafina's lips curved, not into a smile, but into something sharper. A sin feeder, a beast. Those are small words for a truth you've been avoiding. She stepped toward him, the floorboards barely creaking under her feet. You knew from the first night, the cold, the way I looked at people, the wrongness you felt but refused to name. Her breath touched his cheek. You saw a wolf, and you insisted she was a lamb. The witch can bind it again, he whispered. Can she? Serafina's voice softened into something far crueler. They'll hang her before sundown, and when she's gone, the cage goes with her. Her expression shifted, revealing a glimmer of triumph. I've had 17 years to prepare for this. Since the day I learned what my father did to my mother, the witch thought she was rescuing me. My father thought he was controlling me. And you. She laughed, a sound entirely wrong, stripped of its former sweetness. You thought you were saving me. You're using people, Caleb said, all of us. Oh, Caleb. She brushed his sleeve as she passed him, almost tender. You've never been anything but a piece on my board, a move I made. I'll stop you. She turned, head tilted, a predator amused by a mouse. Who will believe you? The lovesick boy who carried me to a witch. You still love me. That's why you won't speak. He opened his mouth to protest, but pain bloomed in his chest. It was true. Even knowing the horror of her, some ruined part of him still wanted her. She leaned close, her lips brushing his ear. Go watch the witch die, then come home to me. The whole town gathered for the hanging. Caleb stood at the edge of the crowd, heart pounding as the witch was dragged forward in chains. She lifted her face, scanning the onlookers until she found him. Her mismatched eyes softened. They looped the rope around her neck. Any last words? The executioner barked. The witch's voice carried over the hush. The princess feeds tonight, and every night that follows, and you. Her gaze locked on Caleb. will be the first course or the last. It has always been your choice." The trapdoor snapped open. Caleb watched her fall, watched her body swing, watched the only person who could have stopped all of this die, with a smile that held no accusation. Behind him, a laugh cracked through the crowd. Serafina stood there, glowing like a flame in the winter light, the townspeople unconsciously shifting away from her. "It's done," she murmured, almost blissful. "I'll stop you," Caleb said again, hollow and shaking. "Will you?" She touched his cheek. "I'll give you a choice, my love. Stay by my side. Help me choose the sinners. Help me hunt. I will never harm you. We'll grow old together. Our children will never know what I truly am. And if I refuse?" Her eyes darkened, her smile stretching too wide. "Then you become the first feast, and your family." Her teeth glimmered. "The second." He stared at her, and he chose. 3 months passed. To the world, nothing seemed wrong in Dunning Hop. Judge Bridger's daughter had married the farmer's son in a wedding painted as a fairy tale. Visitors flocked to see the breathtaking bride. Whispers of her beauty carried across counties. People went missing, but quietly. A drifter here, a convict there. Sinners plucked from the world before their time. Caleb tried to fight, tried to warn people, tried to run. No one believed him. And worse still, the witch had been right. He loved her, even now, even knowing every atrocity. It clung to him like a sickness. The unraveling came on a night smothered in snow. The town lay buried in white. The mansion creaked with the weight of winter. Caleb sat before the fire, haunted by the sounds he'd heard from the basement, wet tearing, a scream muffled into nothing. She appeared behind him, silent as frost. Serafina, pale as bone in a flowing white gown, drifted into his lap and pressed her lips to his throat. "I'm hungry," she breathed. "There's food in the kitchen. Not the kind I need." Her teeth grazed his skin, sharp now, predatory. "The storm keeps the sinners locked away, but you..." Her tongue traced his pulse. "You have sins of your own. You promised you never. I promised if you helped me." She leaned back, her eyes pits of ancient hunger. "But you've been plotting, scheming, trying to find ways to end me." Her smile shattered the last illusions of her humanity. "Did you think I wouldn't smell it on you?" "Serafina, please." "I've been patient," she whispered, threading her fingers into his hair and pulling his head back. "But patience breaks." "Wait," Caleb choked. "If you kill me, you lose your partner, you lose everything." "I've always been alone," she said, "even in your arms." Her expression softened painfully, sorrowfully. "One gift, Caleb, one truth before the end." She knelt before him, took his hands gently, as though she were still the girl he'd once carried into the night. "The witch did not die by accident," she murmured. "She gave herself to me, offered her life as the price for your wish, and with her death, she gave me something new." What did she give you?" "A choice." Serafina's thumbs brushed his palms. "I can decide who I devour and who I spare, and I spared you." "Why?" Her voice softened into a caress. "Your guilt." She smiled, almost tender, almost loving. "It sustains me." Caleb froze. "My guilt. Every night you lie awake hatting yourself for what you caused, I feast," she whispered. "Every time you look at me and see the monster you unleashed, I grow stronger." His breath shattered. Then why tell me now? Because guilt dies when the truth arrives. She stood, her body beginning to bend, twist. And when the guilt dies, so does my reason to let you live. Serafina, I did love you, she murmured, her voice warping as her skin split. In the small way a creature like me can love. And then she came undone. Her beauty peeled away. Her jaw cracked open, swinging wide enough to swallow a man whole. Teeth spiraled endlessly into a tunnel of darkness that devoured the firelight. Eyes multiplied across her face like blooming, blinking stars. A nightmare older than the land itself unfurled toward him. Caleb ran, but something cold and rope-tight snapped around his ankle and dragged him back. He hit the floor hard, fingertips tearing bloody streaks across the carpet. Wait, he screamed. I have sins, I have guilt. She paused. All the eyes blinked. Show me. And Caleb confessed. Everything. The money he stole as a boy. The lies he told his dying mother. The promises he broke. Abigail's sweet, forgotten Abigail with the ring he'd given her. The jealousy. The rage. The hatred. The fantasies of vengeance. The selfishness. The cowardice. Every rot in his soul spilled from his trembling mouth until his voice was gone. When he finally fell silent, Serafina's monstrous form softened. Her features folded back into something almost human. She touched his hair gently. Your guilt is endless, she whispered, a well that never dries. She smiled, wearing his stolen ring. You're too valuable to devour. Her cold breath brushed his cheek. You'll never know peace again. Every dawn will bring new shame. Every night more sins to harvest. She kissed his forehead, ice cold. I'm going hunting, she whispered. Don't wait up, my prince. The door closed behind her, and Caleb lay on the floor, alone with the guilt she had planted inside him, a garden she would feed from forever. The night had bled into morning, but Caleb didn't notice. He lay on the cold floorboards of the mansion's grand room, staring into the rafters as if answers were hidden in the shadows. Outside, a storm clawed at the eaves, dragging snow across the windows in long, icy streaks. And somewhere far out in the dark, something cried out once, and then nothing. The world he thought he understood had collapsed in a single night. Every belief he'd clung to, every hope he'd nurtured, felt like burnt paper drifting through his chest. Yet behind all that ruin, a stubborn ember pulsed. Not hope, something harsher. The old woman had told him the truth before she fled into the hills. There's only one way to kill what wears her skin. Iron straight through the heart. Caleb pushed himself upright, his limbs trembling, and stepped toward the hearth. The iron poker still hung where it always had, black and heavy and honest. He gripped it with both hands, letting its weight settle into his bones. He imagined standing by the door when she returned. Imagined waiting for her, sluggish, full, unguarded, and driving the iron straight through her heart before she could twist herself open again. Saving himself, saving the town. Murder and deliverance. The words felt identical now. Or he could bend, accept the change she offered, live as her willing guilt bearer for as long as she wanted him. The choice had always been his. She'd simply never rushed him to make it. When dawn finally smeared pale light across the room, she appeared. Her red dress dripped darker in places, as though she'd walked through shadows that clung like oil. Her face was soft, glowing with a wicked contentment. Caleb hadn't moved from the ashes of the fire. The poker rested across his legs. His eyes were hollowed out, his mind worn raw from playing the same scene over and over. Stand, swing, enter. 3 motions. 3. Serafina paused at the threshold, her gaze sweeping over the scene. The extinct flames, the weapon, the ruin on his face, and she smiled. Even then, even knowing exactly what she was, his chest tightened as if it were the first time he'd ever seen her. "You stayed awake," she murmured. She glided across the floor, lowering herself onto his lap as though the iron he held were a harmless trinket. In that light, she didn't look like the thing that had followed him through the night. She looked like the girl he'd seen at the autumn fair, the girl in the blue dress covered in morning glories, drifting through the crowd like a dream. "You know the only thing that can stop me," she whispered, lips grazing his ear. "Iron right through the heart. Is that why you're holding it?" "Yes." "Then prove it." She lifted her chin, opening her arms and offering a challenge. "I'm slow. I'm full. If you want to be the hero you've always imagined, now is the moment." Caleb's fingers tightened around the poker, his muscles coiled, his vision blurred with the instinct to act. One strike, one, and this nightmare would be over, the land safe, his life his own again. But then the memory hit him. Her behind the glass window of her father's carriage, pale face, dark eyes locking with his through dust swirling in the wind, the quiet that had swallowed the world in that instant, the certainty, overwhelming and ridiculous, that everything in his life had been leading to her, to that single heartbeat. That phantom girl was what stopped him. Not the horror in front of him, not the monster wearing her skin, but the echo of the girl who never existed. The poker slipped from his hands and struck the stone with a flat, final sound. "There it is," she breathed. Her cool palms cupped his cheeks and her smile softened, so close to human it almost hurt to look at. "You had the weapon. You had the truth, you had the chance, and you still didn't do it. Do you realize what that means?" He didn't speak, he couldn't. "You're mine," she said gently, "not by force, but by choice. You looked straight into the abyss and decided you'd rather fall in than walk away." Tears blurred his vision, hot and useless. "What happens now?" Now she rose and crossed to the window. Snow lay like a shroud over the hollow. People below bustled awake, unaware of the hunger watching them. "Now you help me. You'll guide me to the wicked ones. You'll hand them over, and I'll let you keep your guilt. You nourish me with it. It binds us." She turned back toward him, and her skin folded apart with a wet, soundless ripple. Eyes too many blinked awake beneath the illusion. Teeth spiraled like a nightmare into a grin. "And if someday you decide to run," she said in a voice that scraped the air, "I'll eat you anyway, slowly, patiently, a little at a time, until all that's left is a memory that used to call itself a man." She knelt in front of him again, the monstrous form melting away into the girl from the harvest fair, the one who'd never been real. She took his shaking hands, smiling warmly. "My prince," she whispered, "my lovely, broken prince, we're going to have such a perfect life together." She opened her mouth. Caleb Farrow, the farm boy who once climbed through a princess's window, believing he was saving her, looked straight into the void that adored him and waited for the darkness to take him. Epilogue. 3 months later, they found what remained of him. He sat in a chair beside a cold hearth, untouched by violence, no marks on his body at all. But his eyes were open, glassy, staring at something no living man should ever see. And his lips were drawn into a smile that made grown men whisper prayers under their breath. Serafina wept at the funeral, her grief a flawless performance. She wore mourning black, accepted every condolence with grace, and when night fell over the hollow, she walked the ridges alone, feeding, growing stronger. Now and then people vanished, a stranger passing through, someone with sins heavy enough to draw her interest. The town learned not to ask questions. After Judge Bridger died, the mansion became hers entirely. She remained there for generations, untouched by time. Folks still call her the Appalachian Princess. They still whisper about the farm boy who loved her so fiercely, he freed the thing inside her. The boy who became the first taste of a rain that never ended. And on certain nights, when the moon hangs full and the wind crawls through the hollows, you can hear her moving through the dark. Still hunting, still watching, always hungry.